The following is a GoPowerCat.com production.
It is 77 degrees in Orlando, 52 in Austin, Texas. It's 50 degrees at Studio 73, where Brien Hanley is usually at. Obviously, he's not there because I'm here. And in Manhattan, Kansas, it's 33, and it feels like 77. And this, my friends, is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
I don't want to do an alternate open when I host. It's too much work, guys. Bud Elliott, Chris Hummer, both from the national staff. Bud, there in beautiful Orlando, 77 damn degrees. Screw you, Elliott. Hey, Hummer, you got your winter jacket out? It's 52 in Austin.
Man, I had my coat out yesterday. I'm not even gonna lie to you. It's misty, it's rainy, it's cold.
I don't blame you. Well, I appreciate you joining us as we have a discussion about the new Big 12 and some of the stuff going on with that. And this show kind of focuses on the 16 teams that are coming up. We don't really talk about Oklahoma and Texas unless it comes up in discussion of what's going on right now on the basketball courts. But this is interesting. And Bud and I were just talking about this before we kind of launch into this whole Spygate thing. And Alex Bussey, our Iowa State writer up there, is, kind of in it. And he said the story's kind of progressing up there, which is kind of funny because in Manhattan, Kansas, well, the team never came back from Ames. They just went to Houston. And so there's been really nothing more. And it seems like it's kind of died down on this end. But as national guys, just give me your quick thoughts on this whole situation.
My initial thought, because I really don't cover much college basketball at all, it was I didn't know this was a thing in basketball. Obviously, there are set plays you draw up out of a timeout potentially, but I'm trying to think, what could you actually steal that would be actionable for you, and in what way could you relay it with the expediency that allows you to actually take action upon it, right? So I'm sort of fascinated to see what's going to come out of this. I
am too. And by the way, folks, if you don't know, Kansas State has accused Iowa State of spying on their huddles during timeouts. It finally came out yesterday, and it's kind of seems to be burning through its life cycle already. Kansas goes in there on Saturday, so it is a story we're tracking. Chris, your thoughts?
Oh, I guess what we need to find is just like third rung tier analyst to pin this on. Maybe have him show up on the sidelines of another game from earlier this year at a different polo, and then we'll have a real scandal going on.
I know.
Outer Scallions involved in this, and I'll take off.
Who knows? I mean, it was a dark corner. Maybe it was him. He's, if you're going to hire someone, hire the best. Okay, guys, let's talk about this new Big 12. And I really like this conference. I kind of wish Utah would join and feel like they're participants in the conference. But I think that'll all settle down once everything starts. But I was figuring this up today, and it kind of blew my mind. It's the end of January. We got February, March, April, May, and June. February, March, April, May. We're 5 months away from July 1, the new conference launching. It's crazy. But let's just start with the basic stuff. How good will this 16-team alignment be for the new Big 12?
I think it'll be entertaining. I think it's going to be the most balanced conference in America. I think it has an argument to be the most entertaining conference in America week to week, because anybody can beat anybody.
Right.
In terms of the national standpoint, that's a different conversation. I would imagine the Big 12 gets one team in the playoff most years, max, just based on the way this is going to line up. But I know I'll be watching a lot of Big 12 football on Saturdays.
Bud? Yeah, I think if you like football and you like competitive football and various styles of play, I think you're really going to like the Big 12. I'm going to watch quite a bit of the Big 12. Now, as far as getting the huge TV numbers, which doesn't really dictate what I watch, but certainly executives care about it quite a bit. I think there are enough logos in the Big 12 that are recognizable, right, that it will be watched. But there are some sidewalk type fans who only watch teams that ESPN is going to browbeat you with on every single sort of studio show they do about the national championship race. And there probably aren't a lot of teams in the Big 12, for the Natty. So how much play will they get on shows like Game Day or Big Noon Kickoff or CBS Sports HQ? I guess we'll see. I think it's going to be really entertaining.
But let's not forget that the biggest star in college football resides in the Big 12 in Boulder, Colorado. Like, they're going to get plenty of time on TV through September until Colorado's out of the national title hunt again. And then the sports person of the year, I'll have to take a step back.
That I don't even start me on the sports person of the year. But anyhow,
Wait, person of the year.
Yeah, Sports Illustrated Sports Person of the Year. Deion
Or won Sports Person of the Year? Nice.
No, Deion won Sports Person of the Year. Not
okay.
Yeah. You didn't. It was among the many Sports Illustrated controversies over the last 3 months.
Was that
really?
AI
going on?
Was that AI generated content, or was that did they author that?
They authored that. Pat Forty did a nice sit down article. But yeah, it was in between AI generated and laying off the entire staff before that got sampled.
Poor Pat. He looks around and like, where'd everyone go? That's a huge story, though. I don't care what Colorado's record is. That is a seismic addition now to the Big 12, bringing Colorado back, the first school to return in realignment to their previous home. But that has been big for Colorado. Look, hiring the right guy, and he's beyond the right guy. That's seismic with it. It was just unbelievable the amount of money that came in because of Deion. But that, I think a lot of people will be watching Big 12 games if Colorado's involved. We saw Colorado State about blew up TVs.
It was nuts. I mean, if you get Colorado without Deion, I don't think it's quite the story that otherwise would be, right? But because you get Deion, because you get Shador, you get Travis Hunter, you get all those guys, you get to see sort of not the spectacle, but like just the challenge that it is. Okay, like in fantasy baseball, we use the term like stars and scrubs, right? And that's kind of what that team was this past year. There were not a lot of like middle ground, good to decent college football players. You had a couple guys who were otherworldly good, and you got a lot of guys who were like, I don't know if you're really Power 5 scholarship worthy here, but okay, let's see what we got. How do they build that up this year to where, I mean, they went 1-8 in the Pac-12. Now, that's a much tougher Pac-12 than it was 2 years ago.
Absolutely.
So I think it was an improved team for sure. Like 1-8 doesn't tell the whole tale, but you still won one conference game. So I'm curious to see how they do in the new Big 12.
Hummer, you're our transfer portal guy at 24/7. Just give me your kind of thoughts on how much they use the portal, how much they're still using the portal, and does this change the entire game for a program in a conference like the Big 12, in which sometimes you don't want to fill up your recruited class because there might be talent coming down, falling in your laps from a higher level?
Well, you're talking about Colorado specifically, or just
they're both kind of.
Well, I mean, Colorado currently is number 6 on our transfer portal rankings. It's not quite like last year when they signed, I believe, 40 plus scholarship players in the transfer portal, which was unprecedented. But Deion Sanders is still aggressively turned over his roster once again this offseason. And I think much like last offseason, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's a lot of guys that Colorado's taken this offseason that are 2 deep additions at best. But I think there's some really good players sprinkled in that mix. I think Colorado got multiple starters in the portal this offseason. LeJohntay Wester, the wide receiver, is going to be a big addition for them. They took a defensive lineman from Pittsburgh, Samuel Oklahoma. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to be able to pronounce
Okunlola.
Oklahoma, who is a impact player, probably the best transfer they taken this offseason, will immediately be their best defensive lineman. They got some high upside guys like Cordell Russell from TCU, a former top 50 prospect that does come with a share of baggage, leaving Fort Worth. But Colorado got better once again this offseason. And I would argue, even though that Colorado schedule is a little more difficult than some other teams in the Big 12 next year, they have a window to be far more successful because it's going to be an easier road for them with a better roster. And Colorado, frankly, like we were talking about stars earlier, they have crossover stars in this roster. Travis Hunter and Shador Sanders are crossover stars in college football. They're bigger names than Quinn Ewers or Carson Beck going into 2024 nationally. So the Big 12 will have a large spotlight on them next year because of Colorado. And I wouldn't pick Colorado to win the Big 12, but I do think they have a runway to be very competitive next year.
Yeah, I think they can. I think they can play with some teams, and but again, in this conference, every game's a coin flip. It seems like, so it's kind of a mess.
FanDuel opened their over/under at 4.5 wins, which kind of felt a little short to me. Like I think that I like the depth of this transfer class better than what they took last year. Like last year at the top was clearly superior to what they have now. But I mean, Shedeur and Travis Hunter are going to do that for you. Like I like the Hodge kid from Liberty. I think he's somebody who's probably going to start for them. He was a good player, for Liberty. I've seen Quincy Wiggins in person before as a recruit, and like there's not a lot of guys who look like that on Colorado's roster. And it's an open question, like why didn't he get run at LSU? Because they got a lot of D linemen hurt, and he still didn't play much. So maybe there's something there, something holding back for putting it all together. But maybe a change of scenery can help him. The one thing we talked about last year, early in the season, I was talking with Carl Reed at 24/7. I was like, the one thing Colorado probably doesn't know what they're got coming for them. All these kids watch YouTube and TikTok, and they are not going to take Colorado lightly. And if you're not a good team, you're not used to being everybody's Super Bowl. Like Georgia's got the depth and the talent to be everybody's Super Bowl. Colorado doesn't, but everybody gave them their best shot because if you lose, you're getting the watch thing. You're going to be you're going to be like the next subject of Shedeur's next TikTok. So I think that's hard for a team that's probably like just sort of if you power rated it like somewhere between like 40th and 70th in the country to handle every single week getting your best shot because there's not a lot of quality depth there. And we'll see if that continues this year.
Well, and in the Big 12, you don't have the same kind of depth you do with some of these SEC programs. We've seen it with Kansas State, the school I cover, but certainly as you tour around this conference, that number 2 or 3 guy you might get to as injuries pile up isn't the same as the number 2 or 3 guy that you might see at certainly Alabama and Georgia, but even other programs like LSU, Penn State up north. They just don't build that kind of depth. So you can get in trouble real fast in the Big 12 if you run out of dudes. But yeah, I'm fascinated by Colorado. I'm fascinated by Utah. They had a down season. They had about as injury riddled season as I've ever seen. They got a great coach. They've got, obviously talent. They bring the quarterback back. Guys, I think Utah is maybe the team to beat, but I think there's some teams in the existing, teams, the 12 that will be coming over, joining with the other 4 that could match that. But boy, Utah has a golden opportunity here to step right into the Big 12.
I would probably peg Utah as the early favorite as well, but that comes with a giant caveat, and that is Cameron Rising's health. This is somebody coming back that I think Utah, at least in the first half of the season, was hopeful week over week that Cameron Rising can step back in the lineup at certain points and come through and play for them. And he just never got, he just never got better. Yeah. And he does have an entire offseason now to continue to rehab and improve. But I mean, he is a much injured, I think 7th year college football senior now, and there's not a lot of depth behind him at that position on that roster for Utah. So if Cameron Rising doesn't come back 100% or Cameron Rising gets hurt again, as you mentioned earlier, Tim, with the depth, I think Utah could be in some trouble. Not that I don't trust Kyle Whittingham and his staff to put together a successful season. I believe they've won 8+ games, 6 of the last 7 years. The only year they didn't do it was during COVID. So this is a team that has established a roster base good enough to compete year over year. And they're going to be even more talented compared to the rest of the Big 12 than they were in the Pac-12 when you had to deal with USC and Oregon every year. This is a team that I think if you look at the team talent composite or the blue chip ratio going into 2024 will be first, second, maybe third in this league at worst. I think TCU is probably going to be right there with Utah. So I think Utah is really well positioned going to next year if Cameron Rising's health is where we think it's going to be.
Totally. I usually don't want to pick a Big 12 team that has to play 5 road and 4 home because of the 9-game schedule. Like somebody's playing more home than road. But Utah, I think, had 35 guys play at least 150 snaps, which is a large number. I mean, I think that really speaks to the number of injuries that they had this year. They played a 4th string walk-on against Colorado because Barnes was out. I think, and obviously the starters, as we said, and also the second string. I was like, I've never really heard of this kid. Like, can he play? We'll find out. And the answer was not really, but the defense played well enough that they were able to squeak that one out. But if you look at the schedule, the road games are not too hard. Like at Arizona State, it's probably still one of the worst teams in the league, I would think. But again, I don't know what they were also super injured and concentrated injuries. Like they had the cascade effect of, I think they were playing walk-ons on the offensive line by Halloween. So that was difficult for them. So we'll see what they look like at full strength. Colorado, Houston, at Oklahoma State, at UCF is not easy, but they dodge Kansas State and they dodge Arizona. So I think you'd probably take that. All right, we got to play 5 times on the road, 4 times at home, but no Arizona, no Kansas State is a decent trade-off for I would agree there. But like, can you really say anybody's a crazy strong favorite to win the league? Like this year, to me, it looked like Texas, and then you pick a team that's not Texas in case Texas does some Texas stuff, and screws around. But I don't know. Like nobody's odds on to me.
No, I would agree with that. And, I think the history of this conference will only be amplified now, which means we could pick another team last year to go with Texas. None of us would have picked Oklahoma State.
No,
and
I did.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
No, I had them 60-1. That's why I was saying like you got to scout the schedules.
Yep, exactly.
Well, I will say Oklahoma State's schedule was extremely friendly. I would pick them to go 8-4, 9-3, but I would have never in a million years picked them to make it through.
I was like, okay, 60-1. I got to take a shot on this because I feel like their odds it didn't line up, but I had to hedge out. Like I watched them play. I was like, Texas has much better athletes here than Oklahoma State does. So.
No, it was a mismatch. Oklahoma State played really good football for about 3 weeks, month, but beat all the teams they needed to beat for tiebreakers. It was kind of amazing. Beat KU, K-State, and Oklahoma all in that spread, and they won all the tiebreakers because of that. Mike Gundy's now, I don't know Kyle Whittingham's age, but now Mike Gundy may not be the oldest fart in this coaching circle. But I want to back up to another new team. Arizona comes in, and everyone's fired up for Arizona, and then Nick Saban retires. And the dominoes start toppling through college football. I didn't hear who San Jose State hired to replace the guy they hired there, but this is crazy, guys. I mean, a coach leaves and like 4 programs are hanging on for dear life because of it. It's a mess, but what horrible timing for Arizona to lose Jed Fish, a really good coach, going right into this new conference.
Well, I will say this. Nick Saban eliminated a top 12 preseason team for me very quickly. And I'm not saying Arizona can't be very successful this year, but they have still lost some key pieces in the transfer portal over the last couple of weeks, despite the fact that they kept the 2 best players in the roster, Noah Fifita and Territorio McMillan. So I still think Arizona has a chance to win the Big 12, but I think a lot of it's going to be determined how Brent Brennan manages to reel a couple of these starters back, and he has brought a couple of players back on this roster already that they've withdrawn from the portal, and how they handle themselves in the spring in the transfer portal window. Because 3 weeks ago, this looked to be a team, I believe, that returned 18 starters and was one of the hottest teams in college football at the end of the regular season and through bowl season as well. And now it's a big question mark with Jed Fish, a lot of that staff moving on, and a couple key defensive pieces especially. So I'll be very curious about Arizona, but I know they're going to be fun to watch because Noah Fifita is one of the most entertaining players in college football, and I encourage everybody to go pull off his, I guess we don't call them mixtapes, right? This highlight tape for this year, because it is unbelievably fun.
I also echo Chris's thoughts there, but I don't know that Brent Brennan is actually a coaching downgrade from Jed Fish. Right? I think Brent Brennan can really coach, man. Like, it's not like San Jose has real NIL and is able to keep players, and their roster gets picked over pretty good each year. And he always has been competitive. I thought they had a rough start to the season. They kind of struggled to get in gear early on, but they had played Oregon State, USC, and somebody else like within the first month. So I really was having trouble making heads or tails of what this team was, because you could be terrible or just kind of bad, and it doesn't look any different if you're playing Caleb Williams. So I thought at the end of the season, though, that San Jose was actually the best team in the Mountain West. Like, if you kind of adjust my power ratings every week, I was very impressed, and I thought he's done a really nice job. That's we're working on cover 3 on like what are the least resourced jobs out there, and San Jose is up there in terms of being at the bottom of the list as far as what you have to work with. Like them, Nevada, a couple schools in the MAC.
ULM is number 1 seed by a mile on least resources. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut
no, 100%. That is, they could film Waterboy there today if they needed to. So, I mean, I'm kind of curious to see what he does, but Chris is right. Like, they've lost a lot of important guys. And if you watch the bowl game when they were missing 2 of their offensive linemen, I think that's the area of concern for me, because Oklahoma was giving them fits. They had 6. They got OU coughed it up 6 times, which if you're a Big 12 fan is probably absolutely hilarious to watch. But OU was really roughing them up pretty good. So I don't know how
They
good
also-
the line is. We'll see.
They also have a brutal road schedule. I think they get Utah, UCF, TCU, Kansas State all on the road, in addition to, I believe, BYU. And that's what, probably 4 of the top 7 teams in the conference next year, all on the road. So
Who
that's
do they miss?
They miss Kansas on the road, and they miss Kansas overall. I think that's probably the best team they don't play.
Yeah, it's interesting because Arizona and K-State actually
Oklahoma
playing
State.
non-conference game because that was an existing contract. So the conference just built it in as a non-conference game. So they'll play 10 Big 12 teams this season, which is kind of a funky situation. They've got also a Colorado contract coming up. I wonder how they'll handle that. But guys, you mentioned in the open that there might be only a path for one Big 12 playoff team. I think if they stick with the committee and how they're doing things, there's a chance of getting, a second team in there on the regular. But it could be program changing if, say, a Kansas State or Utah or an Oklahoma State or Arizona or even Colorado, they show up in that playoff like 2 years in a row, 3 out of 4 years. Is that had the possibility of changing the national perception of one of those schools? Look at them. They're hanging out with the big boys on a consistent basis. You're never going to become a blue blood. That's not how it works, but you can kind of sneak into the back door of the club like Clemson did. And start hanging out with them all the time.
I'm just gonna steal something. I believe Bud said, or maybe it was somebody on Cover 3. Like,
from
power
Bud.
vacuums tend to be filled eventually, right? Like somebody is gonna step up and fill this power vacuum. I don't know if it'll be this year or the next couple of years, but I would imagine somebody of this group, and I'm not gonna pick who it is because I don't know at this point, is gonna. I would have some guesses based on geography and the way they spend, but I think eventually somebody's going to step through and own this conference moving forward. It's just how this tends to work. You don't usually see a conference defined by parity. It very rarely happens. We don't have any really prominent examples of that in the Power 5 over the last 25 or 30 years, even though things do get wacky from time to time in the ACC. So I don't know who it's going to be, but I do expect eventually somebody will elevate to the national stage, and eventually you're going to see one of these teams begin recruiting at a top 10, top 15 level eventually, just because they are going to be put in a position consistently to win the league.
I agree.
If you look at this, so the Big 12 would have had 2 in 2022, obviously Kansas State and TCU. They would have had 2 again in 19, which would have been, Baylor and Oklahoma? That sound right? Baylor and somebody, because I have
Iowa State.
Okay.
No, that's 20. 19. I'm not sure.
Who made it in 19? We're so in 19, LSU won the title. So that
it was LSU, Oklahoma, Clemson, and Alabama.
So it would have been Oklahoma, Baylor. Okay, that makes sense based on how the committees, just based on how the committee's final ranks were. And then 17, I think they would have had another one in. So maybe they're averaging, I don't know, 1.4, 1.5. I do think it is going to be hard for the committee to sit there unless we get an actual RPI type thing. And the committee is really beholden to an RPI type formula. I predict in the first couple of years, the committee is probably still going to have the loss column be the most determinative factor, as it is in most years now. Now, as a Florida State guy, that's kind of painful. But at the same time, for the most part, it usually is determined by the loss column. Like they just kind of, all the undefeateds, and then we will do ordinal style ranking among the zeros. And then we're going to ordinally rank the 1 loss. And then occasionally you see some 2 loss jump by 3, but there's not a lot of situations in which 2s are jumping 1s in Power 5.
You really think 2 loss Kansas will be viewed the same way as a 3 loss, let's say 3 loss Tennessee?
I think early on there's a pretty good shot, depending on who they play in the non-conference. Because again, if you have 3 losses, that's still exposing a lot of warts.
Right.
And then we wonder who are your wins? There's absolutely a situation in which you have a 9-3 SEC team, doesn't make the SEC title game. They have 3 losses. One of those is almost certainly be a bad blowout. So that's not going to look great in the committee's eyes. And the games you're winning are probably not over teams that have a whole lot of wins themselves. So I think what we're going to see is probably fewer Big Ten SEC teams in the first year or 2 than people expect. And then if I'm Greg Sankey, I'm pushing hard for an RPI type measure to kind of juice the scales or tip the scales in my favor.
It could, but here's the flaw in that, Bud. If you're going to a full schedule, 8 games in your conference is going to drag down your RPI. If you're playing, those 3 non-conference, like Georgia has 3 lined up, and they got Georgia Tech on the back end of the schedule, which isn't an awesome opponent. Do they really want the RPI judging those games?
I tend to agree with Tim. I think the SEC is going to benefit more from the eye test and reputation than it would from an RPI system, at least personally.
It's interesting. The thing about this is if you're deemed to be a good conference and you're beating up each other, Big 12 basketball, you're a good conference. That's good parity. But if you're Big 12 football and you beat up on each other, you stink. So much of it's about reputation.
But I guess to Bud's point, like if the power numbers say like 8 of the top 16 teams are SEC teams, like that would be beneficial from an RPI standpoint as well. I would have to see the math play out, but either way,
they can write it however they want.
Yeah.
I mean, like some of these formulas we use for the BCS were really good, and then some of them were completely bastardized when they're like, "Hey, let's take out margin of victory." Like makes the formula less predictive. Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of important if you're squeaking by or winning. Yeah. Now, I'm all for a ceiling on points.
Yeah, I was going to say margin of victory should be capped because as just somebody who grew up in Texas, I remember Oklahoma. I think it was in 2008, just beating Big 12 teams by like 70 points and running up the score, and it essentially made it impossible for the formula to pick. Anyway, it was an interesting year there.
Totally,
indeed. Let's take a quick break right now to hear from our sponsor, Synergy Financial Partners. Great people based out of Georgia, but reps all over the country. We appreciate their ongoing support. We'll be right back after this, boys. We're on YouTube. This won't take long.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
Welcome back to the Big 12 Insiders. Tim Fitzgerald filling in for Big B today, joined by my friends Bud Elliott and Chris Hummer from the 24/7 national staff. I thought they were both in Nashville. Bud's in Orlando and Hummer's in Austin. I would be jealous of Nashville too, but somehow that combination of Orlando and Austin hurt me. I love both those places.
I'm about to get warmer too, Tim, because I'm going to go down to Miami right after this. I got to drive down there because we have the Battle National 7-on-7 down there this weekend.
I'm so sorry you have to.
Low 80s. I don't know, like kind of like shorts or like joggers. I don't know. It's a tough decision.
Yeah, I'm going through the same. It's going to break 40 in Kansas. I've got the same decisions to make. It's going to be lovely.
Hey, joggers work in the 40s. Don't worry, Tim. You got this.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, everyone, if you're watching, make sure you add some questions into the comments. I haven't even peeked at the comments yet. In the third segment, after I get rid of these guys, I'm going to answer some of your questions and wrap up the show. So that'll come up in about 15, 20 minutes. So you got a little warning to get it done. Okay, boys. The transfer portal, Hummer, I'm fascinated because we all thought this would create kind of all the good talent ending up at a few schools. And we've kind of seen almost in the early stages of this, an evening out where maybe some of that, I don't want to say bad talent, the talent that's not seeing the field at some of these programs, those players leave and then kind of rise up the other teams. I think the portal's strangely been an equalizer. We're seeing it in basketball and women's basketball. Is that happening in football?
I think equalizer might be a strong word, but I think it has provided more avenues for teams to be successful. Whereas once before, there was one way to really win in college football, and that was to recruit well, develop well, and then you win football games with talent. Now you have more avenues to approach roster building and roster construction, and that has allowed teams more flexibility and creativity. And I think on the Power 5 level, especially, it helps because you're seeing what's happening is the bottom half of those rosters are getting cut. And they're taking players from the G5 and the FCS that are better than the bottom half of their roster. Mm-hmm. They're going in there too deep. So a lot of these teams are going to be better because more of that talent is flowing up, as you said, Tim. So I think equalizer is a strong way to think about. No, I'm not saying like it's like right in some ways because we see teams like Ole Miss like competing right now in a way they haven't historically. I believe 2 of the 4 10-win seasons in Ole Miss history belong to Lane Kiffin the last 3 years, in large part because of what he's done in the transfer portal. We've seen Mike Norvell in Bud's neck of the woods have a lot of success and really stave off some early struggles because of the transfer portal. TCU went to the national championship game because of the transfer portal in large part. So there are examples of this leading to outsized success, but I still don't think the transfer portal was going to overrule like talent from schools like Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama.
Agree. Bud, thoughts?
I really like the ability that teams have now to sort of go for it, right? Like Ole Miss is not a team that recruits high school well enough to win the SEC based solely on its high school recruiting. They just don't. But if you return a lot of players who ended up being hits out of high school and you're able to keep them from going to the draft or to other schools with the combination of NIL, and you have a favorable schedule, which Ole Miss does by, I think, most new kind of SEC standards, let's go for it, right? Let's run a $15 million NIL payroll or whatever they're going to run, this year or something in the low teens, I would assume, not just for the portal, but overall. You have the opportunity to really kind of push the chips in and go for it. We saw Florida State do it, this past year. I think Ohio State is certainly going. Ohio State's a weird example because I feel like in what year are they not going for it? But they're certainly going for it, this year. So I think it allows perhaps more teams to have some hope that, hey, like if we have a special year, we can add a few pieces and really capitalize on that favorable schedule. I think it makes it a little bit harder for the very best teams because you can't just hoard all that elite depth, like you guys were saying. I mean, think about the guys Bama was losing. They're not proven, but they were proven to have pretty elite, high-level physical traits coming out of high school.
Right.
Now your backups are probably going to be younger.
Yeah, it's interesting. It does erode that, and they move into another program and they do the development they probably would have done at Alabama or Georgia, but now they're doing it in Fort Worth or Boulder. Or Manhattan. It's interesting to me the impact it's had. But also it's not real. The transfer portal is not an elegant tool right now. It's got some serious issues. And one of them is the timing. I mean, these coaches come out of their regular season and they're plunged into portal hell trying to keep their players and trying to recruit players because it's the early signing period. And if you're a good team, you're going to a bowl or even the playoff. Hummer, what can be done to help fix this?
I don't really know if there's Bud and I were both at the AFCA convention this year, which is a big group of coaches being in the same place. You're talking thousands of FBS coaches in the same spot. And you would ask people and there's no really elegant, as you said, solution to this because we're a professionalized sport working around an amateur academic calendar, essentially. I think the cleanest solution would be to close the transfer portal until post-spring, but then you're essentially telling players that they can't enroll for spring football. They can't enroll at a new school early and start their new academic track. There's going to be a lot of people that have problems with that. And while it would eliminate a lot of the headaches that come with the winter transfer portal window, I don't know if you're going to get over those academic hurdles. I think the cleanest solution, and it's not really a solution for anybody or a lot of the problems, but it would alleviate some of the pressure, would be to allow transfers to sign a national letter of intent, just like high school players, and they could do so right away, which would essentially bind transfers to a school as soon as they commit. I think a lot of coaches are in favor of that, and I think that could be a thing that happens in the future. If I was a transfer, I probably wouldn't sign it. I'd probably keep my flexibility. But I think if schools didn't have to continue to recruit transfers all the way through December, it could at least alleviate some of that pressure before they get into school. But it's I don't know if Bud might have some great ideas for this, but I don't really know if there's an elegant, clean solution to fix the transfer portal just because of the realities of the academic calendar.
So we got there on Monday. I started out asking the coaches who I knew, all right, what would you do? What would you change? And then by Tuesday, I started changing my question to, what changes would you make that would actually survive a court challenge? Right? Because everything they suggested was clearly okay, so this is just, let's throw a bunch of non-competes on guys who, you guys say, are not employees. The courts, every time this goes up, you lose because the kind of the fundamental principle of it is unchanged. So I do think Hummer's idea, or at least I don't know if it's his idea initially, but the one that he just said is I think these kids would be kind of misguided to sign it,
Mhm.
but yet a lot of high schoolers, at least pre-portal, were sort of misguided to sign it and still did. So maybe like the very, very top guys, like, yeah, I'm not signing anything. Just I'm going to enroll when I want to enroll. But if you could lock them in that short period, I definitely think a lot of staffs out there, from the coaching perspective, are tired of babysitting their verbal transfer commits until they enroll. Like, okay, if you sign this, cool, we're good. I'll see you in January. If you hate it here, transfer out in February. I don't care. But like, at least I'm gonna enjoy my Christmas without you.
Yeah.
Be worried. Like, you're getting, like, I don't want to have my 22-year-old transfer commit poached over that time. I bet you most transfers would sign it because it's just tradition, and the staffs could probably just leverage them into doing so. And the very best guys probably wouldn't, and yet that's okay.
Yeah, I think the staff, almost like recruiting, says, "Hey, if you don't sign it, we're going to keep recruiting this position."
Right.
You know, if you're not going to lock in, we're not locking in. Yeah, that's one thing that really needs to be done, and that's something I've heard from coaches. Like, you got to keep recruiting them because, you know, even though they commit, other programs don't stop recruiting them. And you brought up the word poaching, and that's kind of an underlying thing that's brewing with the portal. Is, you know, look. What the NCAA did to Florida State, I did one of our daily delivery videos on it. It was just silly. That's what you decide is awful in the transfer portal. Driving it, or the NIL, driving a kid to an NIL meeting. That's when you've got NIL collectives calling athletes saying, "Hey, if you go into the portal, you'd be worth a lot of money here at School X." It's just it's a wild west because the sheriff decided to sit on the out front the saloon and not, you know, have any rules. NCAA said, "Oh, we didn't want this, so we're going to sit it out." It's a mess, man. It's just a mess. But we'll see if that can calm down. All I know is the one true constant through college sports since the beginning of time, and I was there for that, is that if you set rules, someone will find the gray and start chipping away, and then they're not in the gray anymore. They're just flat out cheating, but they're not getting caught, so they keep doing it. And that's just been the history of the NCAA, sadly. And so I don't know if the portal and NIL will ever get fully fixed.
Look who just retired, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Nick Saban was like I'm surprised he didn't have like an on-staff lawyer. It's like, okay, it doesn't say we can't do this. Like, really, you guys are going to hire a 54-year-old graduate assistant who's just coaching the Super Bowl, Al Groh? Yeah, and then like they had to put in the rule. Okay, you could not have been, you know, a professional coach for more than X number of years or out of college for, like, you know, basically like you can't be a 50-year-old NFL experienced graduate assistant. So yeah, like I totally agree. People are going to try to find the loopholes within a rule system.
Especially a system that was designed from the outset with a hope and a prayer. Like, their system had no chance of being successful the moment it was set. They essentially set up a system knowing that they did not want to make athletes employees. So they were going to have outside interests essentially pay for their athletes and then take the responsibility off of the schools. Like, this was always destined to fail. And it's laughable when the NCAA and schools get up in arms about tampering and things of the like, because they set this system up and designed it to fail from the beginning.
Yeah, that's well put. You're like an expert. I'm glad I had you on. That's exactly right.
I think expert might be strong for anything associated with my name. Like, I'm an expert. I'm taking naps. That's about it.
Oh man, no, I got you beat there, buddy. Elliot, let's get to one of my favorite topics you brought up, and it's kind of died down. You know, about a year ago, you were talking about the Big 12 needs to lean into sports betting. And I think it's just brilliant. I think Big 12 games in the future, I know they're on their existing contract for a year or two here before the new one starts. Look, you got a rules expert sitting back in your studio in New York or wherever. I think they need to have a sports betting expert back there. Hey, this dude's closing in on, you know, the over for your passing yardage or whatever, to kind of just give updates on some of these prop bets and other things. You know, what the line might be from the chosen book, the halftime line. Those things I think are relevant to fan watching, and they give the Big 12 that little extra something that maybe the sports bettors are going to start tuning in. That roving gang of degenerates out there that are watching college football, maybe they'll pause on the Big 12 games because of this embracing of it and boost the ratings.
The unsaid part of Maction, back when Maction used to be a bigger part of the kind of college football fan lexicon, was that I think everybody really, not everybody, many of the people enjoying Maction had a little action on the Maction, right? So, yeah, I just think the Big 12 with the likely style of play and all the close games coming down to the wire, when almost all these teams are somewhere between like the 10th best team in the country and like the 70th best team in the country, like you're not getting a lot of 25-point spreads.
Oh.
Like everything's coming down to the wire. We know that some of these companies are working on smart remotes and ways to be able to like bet from your remote. And if I'm the Big 12, I'm trying to be first to market with that, right? Like, hey, you can actually live bet these games from your TV when you watch Big 12 games. Like, I think people would probably do that. Now, I don't know how many people, but I bet you FanDuel or DraftKings or whomever would pay quite a bit to be the one to offer that because it's free advertising for them. Like they're staying burned on screen the entire time. And I'm sure some people would not enjoy it. So I don't know if it needs to be the primary offering, but you'd get a lot of, if you're first to market, you get a lot of pop just from, first mover advantage, right? And all the like media exposure that would come with it. Whoa, look at this. You can live bet on your TV on Big 12 games. And Yormark seems to be like a kind of guy that likes to get attention on his product, which is sort of the job of the commissioner, but like he's willing to try stuff. They had like pro wrestlers at the Big 12 title games. Like, what are they doing there? I don't know, but I saw it. Yeah,
I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that. And I hope Big 12 publishers aren't required to wrestle because I'm totally screwed, guys. I'm old and fragile.
Don't mess with Mike at the West Virginia site is what I would tell everybody.
I know.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on?
I've seen their video. Like, I don't think Jarrett's too small either. Like, he might be okay in a tussle.
No, I'm not confident of anyone. I mean, even Michael Swain would kick my ass. Let's be honest. However, how do you feel about? There's a lot. Bud brought it up there. There's a lot of people like, oh God, I'm so opposed to betting. It's ruining society. It's ruining sports. I'm not going to watch this because of it. Is that a real concern?
I mean, probably if you're Matt Campbell. Sorry. I would say to people that are against sports betting, like in college football, like, why do you think the NFL is so successful?
Right.
It's partly fantasy football, obviously. Like fantasy football is a mechanism and a like level of interest in the NFL that like no other sport has managed to replicate. And it's just like something that drives the most casual viewers to tune in. Like my wife plays fantasy football with me and can probably name 7 NFL players, period. So that's a level that you're not going to tap. But how you get the return audience and how you get the degenerate audience is through gambling. And it's also a smart way to introduce the sport to people who aren't well-versed in it. I have friends that don't watch a lick of college football, but still manage to place like 5 to 10 bets on a Saturday because it's what's on and there's a copious amount of it. So I think if you want to drive interest to the sport and you want to drive interest to your conference specifically, if you are a conference that is friendly with betting, I think it's a good way to grow the game. You're going to have to push through some people like complaining about it ruining like the like amateur model and the purity of the sport. But like,
so pure.
How is that any different than introducing NIL or any of these other things? Now you got head coaches like soliciting donations on TV. Like people are going to get used to sports betting. So I think it would be an avenue that would certainly bring a lot of interest. And if somebody wanted to convince the state of Texas to bring it to Texas so I could start using DraftKings and FanDuel, I'd appreciate it.
Hey man, Keisha Butte would watch.
Yeah. I don't understand Texas. You're about freedom and stuff. Let's place a bet here. Good heavens. Come on. But as you know, the Big 12 Media Days next year is in Vegas. So you will be there probably. I know. I will. I might have sat it out normally. Oh, it's going to be in, I don't know, Phoenix. No, I'm going to sit this one out. Vegas. Okay. I'll be there 4 days. I know it only lasts 2 days. I'm going to be there 7 days. I'll be there 10.
Honestly, like if I have to skip a media day now, I'm probably skipping SEC.
What?
Because it's all broadcast on TV. You get like hardly any one-on-one access with any coaches. You can't pull anybody off to the side. I kind of need to go to ACC because all the chaos in the ACC right now, and you can still see people there.
SEC is the worst by far. It's not even close. It's just an awful experience. Media member.
It was in Nashville this year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I went because I needed to go into the office for some stuff. Okay, yeah. But like if it's back in Birmingham, I'm probably going to skip.
Well, it'll work out well for me because my office might be in Vegas. I mean, I can do this from Vegas. I could replicate this crap in Summerlin. I don't even Henderson. I don't know.
Henderson. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. One more topic though, because I've got a Florida State guy here. ACC's future and how it might impact the Big 12. But is this ACC in peril of, possibility of just kind of flying apart and all of a sudden there's 12 schools in the other three major conferences? Is that even possibility?
I think it's possible, but I don't know how fast that would happen. In the long term, I think almost anything is possible. And we have two schools now who can literally throw rocks into the Pacific Ocean that are playing in the Atlantic Coast Conference in Cal and Stanford. So I've learned to never say never when it comes to conference realignment. I do think, like, if I had to predict where FSU's playing in like 2027, I would say the Big Ten. But like 2025, by next year, I don't know what will happen there. And the ACC made some defensive moves, notably adding those two California schools and adding SMU because they needed to keep their quorum if certain schools left. Because if they drop below a certain number of schools, then ESPN could revisit the deal. And the haircut they would receive if you lose Florida State, Clemson, Miami, or perhaps a UNC would be pretty substantial. So I think that was a smart defensive move by most of the schools in the league. And you could tell which ones didn't vote for it. The ones who are sort of more probably proactively investigating their options to leave. But it's, I don't know, maybe I'm naive in this. It does feel like even if you took those schools out, it's a much bigger property than like the old Big East was, right? To me. So I think it'll stick around. I don't know if it'll stick around in its current format.
Chris, any thoughts on the future of the ACC?
Billable hours are going to win out. Like,
that's the truth.
A lot of money to be made by lawyers everywhere.
Let's drag this out, guys. We got billable hours to rack up.
That's like Bud. I would be surprised if the ACC is here for the long haul. I think schools like Florida State, Clemson are very motivated to get out of the league and continue football success. And we're going to see a continued consolidation of the biggest brands in two conferences. I don't know if it'll be in 2025, 2028, 2030, like when it's going to happen, but I have no doubt that eventually some of these teams will be let out of the league. I do wonder, like, if the ACC will stick around. I understand, but Bud's argument there, and I realize there are a lot of interesting brands, but I think momentum drives a lot of realignment and panic drives a lot of realignment. And if you start to see school after school jump ship for the SEC and you see school after school jump ship for the Big Ten, and you're one of the, let's say, 8 to 10 schools left over, and 4 of y'all have a sitting offer for the Big 12 for a guaranteed payout, which is going to probably be larger than you're going to get left over in the ACC, I think they're going to take it. So I think it's going to be very similar to what we saw happen this year at the Pac-12. I do think the ACC would break up. I think the days of 4 power conferences, which, what are we like? We're like 30 days into that period right now, like, are about done. And I would be surprised if we have more than 3 in a decade.
Yeah. I think the SEC will break up too.
You do?
And not necessarily like you are kicked out. It's more, I think, of, your invitation to what's next got lost in the mail. Sorry, the mail didn't reach Starkville or Nashville or Columbia. The smaller markets, well, Nashville is not, but the football product's just not on the same level necessarily. I think they're probably, like, if you're in Alabama, you're going to look around and say, we're equal revenue sharing with Mississippi State. Really?
I think eventually it's going to be a crazy thing, but we'll probably have like these things like 2 super conferences, and then they get broken up regionally for some reason. Maybe let's call them divisions. And then we have like 6 to 8 of those, and kind of have like divisional play that's going to look a lot might look a lot like conference play. It might be a little smaller pool, but it'll be sort of regionally, and teams will have their little pockets that they compete against each other for, and then maybe come together at the end for a national championship. I wonder what that'll look like in the end. But
the driving factor or driving force behind all of this, though, is, well, the schools want to keep all the money for themselves and not pay the players. They know eventually that's going to happen because either the NLRB or the courts or whomever decides first. And if you're a Florida State or Miami or a Clemson, you're like, shoot, we recruit and compete against these SEC teams. Right now, they out earn us by 3x or 2.5x. But you can only build so many football facilities. You can only make sure your practice field drainage is so good. Like you can only put one Xbox in. I guess you could put two Xbox in each locker. But if the actual advantage becomes being able to pay the players, then that's where you're cooked. So that's why for schools like that, it's a defensive move. That they don't want to run a lower payroll than South Carolina. So that's I think what they're like. They say we're not going to pay the players amateurism, but they know what's coming. So that's why they're trying to secure a bigger piece of that pie.
I did appreciate Chip Kelly's idea of just throwing out conferences for football, and that made sense to me. I never understood, how are you going to relegate teams out of a conference, into the upper 48 or but if they're not in a conference and you're just playing, that level, I get it. I think that would work. I'm not a big fan of the super conference idea probably because my alma mater may not make it in, but that's just how it goes. Can
you imagine, by the way, let's just go 10 years in the past and college football made different decisions and all the conferences stopped fighting with each other. They decided to go in and to get as a group and collectively bargain with these television networks and make one group deal for college football. That would be a massive contract. It'd be bigger than the NFL because you have more product to sell. Yeah. Anyway, college football has been so poorly run for 20 years. It's insane. But.
Exactly right. Boys, this was really fun. I have about 8 more topics written down here. And you should be impressed because normally I don't prepare. I actually spent a good 10 minutes in preparation for the show.
Look at that.
Man, that's just cramping my style trying to be professional. Appreciate it very much, guys. We'll do it again. If you ever want to come back, you're always welcome.
Enjoyed it.
As long as I don't have to actually be in Manhattan for the 40-degree weather, Tim, we'll be fine.
You know what? I'm with you.
I like Manhattan in the summer. It's a beautiful place, but this time of year, I'm going to pass.
We call this, it's going to be like 60 degrees next week. We call it false spring because you get the shorts out, you walk around, and then you wake up the next day and it's 13 degrees. That's Manhattan, Kansas. Boys, thank you very much. Let's hear from our sponsors real quick as I kick them out of the room, and I'll take some of your questions in the chat right after this break.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
Well, that was great. I enjoyed that immensely. We don't have a lot of questions here. I do like this. Bradley said the Big 12 might have the best wrestling in the country. Look, K-State does it. K-State's well prepared. I'm the K-State guy, so you get a K-State answer. Is well prepared if all of a sudden you have to pay your athletes because they offer the minimum number of sports. And frankly, if that era joins college sports, that's going to happen at a lot of schools. We're going to have the minimum. They might lower that minimum because of the amount of money you'd have to pay athletes with. But I am a big proponent of having wrestling back at Kansas State. I say back because it was dropped in like the 70s, and they actually had All-Americans throughout the history of Kansas State. This is a great high school wrestling state, and I think wrestling belongs at this level. Kansas doesn't offer it. So all these great high school wrestlers go to Oklahoma State, Iowa, the South Dakotas and North, all those schools up there do wrestling. They're actually in the Big 12 for that. But I think that is a sport along with softball. I think K-State and other Big 12 schools should be offering softball. I think softball, wrestling, volleyball, football, basketball. I feel like I'm forgetting something there, are all essential sports to an athletic program. And it's one of the things the Big 12 is going to have to really focus on and be good about into the future. Well, Big B will be back on Tuesday. We'll have the K-State version of the Insiders on Monday at 1 p.m. as we always do with our media moguls that join us every week along with Big B. And then we'll have a fresh new week of shows. We're bringing in some more 24/7 pubs. I think we're going to have that Ask Big B segment, one show a week as we continue to grow this. I appreciate it. I appreciate Synergy Financial Partners being our sponsor. They're just great people. Just go check out their website. The link's down in the bio. They're just wonderful people, and they approach financial planning and financial assistance in terms of helping you educate you in a much different and really cool way. That's going to wrap it up for the Insiders. We will see you next week with more editions.
This has been a GoPowerCat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.